Hey everybody, this is Dan, and this is week 7 of class, and we're coming up on a midterm project, which I'll cover in another video here coming up. But what we're going to do this week is we're going to read chapter 6 from Morris. And I know that last week you read chapters 1, 2, and 3, and it was really a long reading. And if you're like me, you found parts of chapter 3, kind of tough to get through. But the point was that these big industrial mega businesses were forming in the late 1800s. So the book talked about Gould, who was the railroad guy, and Vanderbilt, and also talked about Rockefeller, the beginning of Standard Oil, and also about Carnegie and the beginning of large steel production. So, the point to the reading was, and you don't have to remember like all the minutia from the reading, but the point of the reading was that big industrial enterprises were beginning to form. Now we're skipping ahead to chapter 6 because chapter 6 it's a much better read. It's more interesting, I think, and it talks about this movement, into a consumer society. So it also includes this idea that there's a middle class forming in the United States in the late 1800s. And that consumerism and that middle class, which we still know well today, are only possible because of the growth of these large industrial enterprises. In other words, within these large industries, whether it was Standard Oil or Carnegie, but the railroads and many others, there became a class of mid-level managers and blue-collar people who had disposable income. So whether it was managers, accountants, administrators, what have you, the middle class grew out of many of these big business enterprises. So what we're going to read about in chapter 6 is the growth of the middle class, and what comes with the growth of the middle class is consumerism. All of a sudden people had disposable income, and at the same time innovation in technology allowed for mass production of food and of toiletries and soap and other consumer products, and sort of began the country down this path of consumerism, which we're still at today. So it's a good chapter to read. It talks about various brands that started in the late 1800s, such as Kellogg's and Coca-Cola and Heinz Pickles and many other companies that you're aware of. And I think it's interesting because you start to understand the roots of these businesses. Now, the big point here is that we began way back in the 1600s, and we talked about this establishment of capitalism, and then we moved on and we talked about colonial America, and we talked about Alexander Hamilton and Jefferson and the formation of a central banking system, a strong currency, a strong economy, and once we got past the Civil War, the railroad and these other businesses started to take hold, and in turn we get to this urban middle class and consumerism. So it kind of makes sense if you follow it all the way through, and that's what I want you to be thinking about as we move forward in the class. And in some ways it all ties together. We read a lot about the American system of manufacturing, and even though that started in armories and clockmaking, this idea of assembly lines and interchangeable parts, it sets the basis for consumer products, whether it's manufacturing of soap or manufacturing of foods. This ability to mass produce things drives consumerism, because now there are more products available and they are less expensive because they're produced on a massive scale. So what we're going to do is we're going to read chapter 6, and then we're going to go back and we're going to do a midterm project, which I'm going to explain next week. And then we'll move on to more modern stuff. I want to talk about electrification, electricity, and we'll talk about the struggles that businesses had with labor, and then we'll move into electronics and some of the more current industries that are still around today. So that's it for this week, week 7. And if you have any questions, let me know, and I will get to the midterm project here shortly in the next video for week 8. And if you have any questions, again, please contact me. Thanks. Have a great week. Bye-bye.